Where's Jack? We got to get started to have quorum, right? Okay, good evening. Thank you, he's sitting down. Thank you for joining us for the monthly Burlington Police Commission meeting. The time is 6:04, and we are going to start. The majority of commissioners are here, and we have a quorum. Commissioner Garrison and Commissioner Comerford are not present, though Commissioner Comerford might join us online. The chief is also not present, but we hope to see him soon. First item is 1.3, which is the adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to accept the agenda?
I so move.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Any discussion? Hearing none, please say aye to agree to adopt the agenda. Aye. The next agenda item is 2.1, which is the approval of minutes of both August 2023 and September 12th special meeting. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes? Okay. Is there a second?
I second.
Commissioner Cox. Any discussion?
I was not present on the 12th, so
Okay.
I need to
Yes,
recuse.
that needs to be changed. It will be changed. The change is that Commissioner Keefe was not present at the September 12th special meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. All in favor of adopting the minutes with that change, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. The minutes for August 1, 2023 and September 12th special meeting with one change are approved. The next agenda item is 3.1, which is public forum. Is there anybody here who wants to speak to the commission, whether online or in person? Okay. No, you are part of the business today, so.
But she wants to speak. She's eager.
I don't see, so there's no reason, there's no public forum. The next agenda item is 4.1, report from the chief, and chief just made it. So, go ahead.
Hello, and thank you for having me. Apologies for being a bit late, but I guess I was just on time for this. And I have a presentation, as we do monthly. Wonderful, thank you. So this is posted online as well, of course, both on the agenda for this meeting and also on the City of Burlington Police Department webpage under the Transparency and Data page under the Chief's reports. And there are reports dating back to 2020 when we inaugurated this. Next slide, please. So covering September, we were thrilled to get to participate, at least from a security standpoint, again in the Pride March. It was the 40th anniversary this year. It's a terrific day for Burlington, a really wonderful, wonderful event. And you can see one of our officers there who is proudly displaying the flags. Really, really great day. Next, please. We had a pretty significant incident in late August involving, and so this of course dates back, it's not just September, it dates back to the parts of August that came after our August police chief's report. But a gentleman injured two officers slightly in the course of them checking on him for a welfare check, possible overdose in a vehicle. He fled them at a high rate of speed. He was later seen in a neighborhood. The vehicle was seen. He fled officers again via a number of conveyances. He escaped a cordon that we established in Rock Point Park during darkness and went on to stay on the run for a number of other days, about another week, until finally apprehended by troopers with the Vermont State Police and game wardens with the Vermont Department of Fish and Wildlife. Next, please. The Law Enforcement Torch Run is a fundraising benefit for the Special Olympics. We participate in it every year. This year we did it along with some of our colleagues from the UVM PD, and it was a great day on a beautiful, beautiful day in early September. Next, please. This is a piece on vehicles. I had talked about having something on infrastructure. I was not able to get that, but we did get this information on our vehicle fleet. We're currently down by 7 vehicles. We had 5 that were on order. Those were not ultimately ordered and delivered. We haven't had a new vehicle since, I think we've only had 2 since 2021. One of them actually, I think, I can't recall when mine came in, but I had been driving one from 2011 and then got a new cruiser that was meant for, it had been ordered long before I even came to the police department. Mine doesn't do this, but officer cruisers do. Officer cruisers put huge numbers of hours on the engine. It's not about the mileage, it's about the engine hours. And ours are, routinely used about 10 times more than the average for a vehicle in America. This is information that I put together simply in light of the Safer Together solution that presented at the most recent Police Commission meeting, talking about survey data and conducting some additional surveys. I had mentioned in that meeting that we had conducted surveys before, so for the sake of the public, I thought we put the top line results of those surveys up. These are from a while ago. One is from December 2019, one is from August 2021, but both had results that were, I think, both that we were pleased with and that we want to build on. Next, please. Our head count. We are, as of the 1st of September, we were at 67. We're actually at 69 now, as you'll see from the next page, but these are always on the 1st of the month, so these are snapshots of the 1st. Next, please. Here's why we're at 69. We swore in 2 lateral police officers at the very beginning of September, but after September 1st, and are grateful to have them aboard. They have previous experience from Virginia and Texas, and will now enter they just finished up down at the academy doing I believe it was a 2-week program to get them familiarized with Vermont law and certain Vermont requirements. Now they enter into a 580-hour field training program, and then there still are elements of training that they'll have to go back to the academy to complete. Next, please. So again, this 69 doesn't jibe with that graphic on 2 slides ago, which said 67, but the reason is that this is as of the 15th, as it says. So our fortunes had already changed a little bit, and for the better, which is a good thing. This is a breakdown of where officers and non-sworn professional staff who are in the field are assigned. So 24 on patrol. We have a certain number who are unavailable. That includes those 2 officers on the previous slide who are being sworn in. We consider them unavailable. They are at the academy or on field training, so they don't count as deployable authorized officers yet. We have 24 on patrol. Our detective unit has 9. It's actually now up to 10 with a new movement inside. And we, even now, this is the numbers for October will be a little different even than this, because this was as of the 15th, and we've made some changes even since then. But we have 4 CSOs out of 11. We're working hard to continue to build that. 5 CSLs, hopeful to actually get to the top of that and have our full 6 complement, but are working on that as well. Next, please. This is a graphic that demonstrates the changing proportions of the department and the ways in which the professional staff versus the sworn staff and the ratios therein have been changed over the past 5 years. So the authorized number is not all that different. And in fact, one thing that 2019 doesn't show is that parking was a part of the police department at that time. If parking were added, I took parking out just so that the comparisons would be a little bit more equal for consistency's sake. But if you added parking to that authorized total in 2019, it would actually be 150, I believe. Or maybe 149. I can't remember if parking was 10 total or 9 total. But so what has changed a lot, as you can see, are the ratios. This is the total authorized. So this is not what we currently have, of course. We don't have 87 sworn. We've got 69 sworn. But this does give a picture of what we are building towards. Next, please. And this is all those positions laid out by title and type, name, and the number authorized versus the number on staff. Next, please. This is what some of that new professional staff is how it's organized and shaped. We promoted an internal promotion. Shannon Trammell was promoted to executive manager. It is essentially a chief of staff position. It's one that was built into the budget by the mayor during the budget process in the first half of this year. And it's a very important position. I think Shannon's basically been doing this work for quite some time, and I'm glad and gratified that we now get to acknowledge it properly and compensate it fairly as well. But her role is one that is incredibly important to this new professional structure. The other position that we are working on is on hiring and identifying is an assistant director for CAPE, and we are in the process of that. We had interviews that involved members of the HR, members of the city council, and members of the police department, and are hopeful to be able to proceed with that position quite soon. Next, please. This is the priority response plan. Again, it's in every single document just to sort of present a baseline and a context for the pages that follow. Next, please. Year-to-date incident data. Our incidents are back where they were before the pandemic. In fact, they're higher than they were the year before the pandemic by quite a bit, actually. And we're facing it with 50% fewer officers on patrol. So we are stacking about 12% of incidents. We are referring about 12% of incidents to online reporting. We are backlogged on those online reports by several months. And the reason for that is that, right there, that takes about a quarter of the incidents out. We also are answering about a quarter incidents with these new resources that we've either created or augmented, the community support liaisons, the community service officers, street outreach. Together, those three entities take on about 25% of the total incident volume, or are participating, not always as primary, but they're participating in some way. And so if you remove the 25% or so that they address, you remove the 12% that we stack, the 12% that go to online, that leaves 50% of the incidents, and those 50% are being addressed by the 50% fewer officers that we've got. There's not a lot of room for getting to the online reporting, and although we regret having that backlog, we are working on making our way through it. Next, please. These are selected incidents and where they stand vis-a-vis the previous 5 years. I probably next month I will produce a 5-year average, so this year number versus the previous 5-year average number, so that you can get a real sense of the change that has occurred up or down in any of these given categories. But I don't have that this month. Nevertheless, you can see, the categories that have been concerning us for quite some time are still here and of concern, overdose being the most noticeable. Next, please. And so with regard to the drug overview, they are grim statistics. This slide shows that same document, the same information that was on the previous slide with regard to overdose as of this point in the year, in each previous year. There you see it. 350 right now. That's more than the total of last year, although what you see there, 155, is where 2022 was on September 15th. There's also a description here of a charge called death resulting and the challenges that we have when a fatal overdose occurs. These overdoses are not fatal overdoses. The 350 that are shown on this slide, the 155 from 2022, the 51 from 2017, those are generally not fatal overdoses. Those are overdoses to which officers respond oftentimes at the same time as firefighters, that incident is dealt with whether there is a reversal through the use of, say, Narcan, whether there is a medical transport, whether the person revives and refuses any such services. That frequently and increasingly frequently happens. Those are overdoses where the person is alive. Fatal incidents are characterized and categorized as untimelies, an untimely death. And an untimely death may be the result of an overdose, but that's not for officers on the scene to definitively determine. Certainly we can see the pieces of it, whether it's, there's paraphernalia there or narcotics there, but the final determination about an untimely being an overdose or not is going to be made by a medical examiner. And a toxicology report. And even then, sometimes there isn't a determination that it was an overdose. There's the acknowledgement that the toxicology report shows drugs, oftentimes and increasingly many drugs and polydrugs, but it still remains an untimely and we don't recategorize it as an overdose because it was not, it was an untimely death. Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, and sorry to interrupt but I had a question about the response to overdoses. And I've had this question for a while and I just haven't yet asked, but you just mentioned that when you get a call, the police respond and the Burlington Fire Department responds as well. What is the role of the police in that response? And if the paramedics are there, why are the police also there? And is that necessary to have all that response?
Great question. I would say that, 3 years ago or more, 4 to 5 years ago, we got there before firefighters quite routinely. Police officers are constantly on patrol. They're out in the field, and they respond faster than fire does. Fire responds quickly as well, but they're coming from one of 5 locations in the city. And police officers are out on patrol and we're almost always on scenes before fire. It is why getting police officers Narcan was so important in the mid-2010s. And making certain that this agency was one of the first to deploy that Narcan because it really made a difference. We also, as a city and a community, flooded the community with Narcan so that it wasn't just police bringing it, but police got there first. The other issue is that this does remain a crime under Title 18. We no longer treat it as such, to be honest, and I think that there's probably some elasticity about that. I think we're reaching a point where perhaps that is not the path on which we wish to continue, but for the most part, we do not treat personal use or overdose as a crime any longer. But for a long time it was, and it remains so in the statutes. And so the deployment of police was partly about A, they're there first, able to get there first, able to reverse the overdose with Narcan, and B, this is a crime, and police should be there to address it. I think right now, given the posture that we have, that it is not treated in a criminal way, absent there being other circumstances. Again, fatal overdoses or untimely deaths are completely outside of this discussion. But with regard to a typical overdose in a public space that is not a barricaded person, is not a person who has committed some other crime or there's some sort of clear criminal element around this other than the drug possession, or who is not in a vehicle where there are other risks and dangers that occur because of that person being in a vehicle, I don't know that those are police responses. And I think that given the fact that police don't always get to the scene first anymore because we don't have the same number of officers patrolling randomly around the city, I think that moving some of those to a medical-only response probably makes sense.
Are you having those conversations with the Burlington
I am
Fire
indeed.
Department about?
I am indeed.
Because it seems like it would make sense to have a special unit to respond, to allow the police resources to go further, to address other issues that are going on. And I agree that there are times when it makes sense to have police, depending on the circumstances, but for the vast majority of overdoses, we're not treating them. We're all in agreement. I understand that it's still a crime, but we're not enforcing it as such. It seems like to have 6 people responding, or 5 people responding, or even 4 people responding to an overdose might be not the best use of our resources. I'm not saying that we want the person to revive, but it takes one person and then somebody to, transport, and that's not done by the police
No,
department.
the police don't do that. It is a priority 1 response. We send 2 officers whenever possible to overdoses, and that is because sometimes these incidents, there have been more than a few incidents in which a person revived from overdose becomes violent and unhappy with having been revived. Fire has minimum minimum staffing numbers, and those minimum staffing numbers result in them sending as many as 6 people to almost every call, but that's a fire issue. I have been discussing this with Fire Chief LaChance. I have discussed it also with Mayor Weinberger, and delineating some new parameters for those overdoses that remain a police response versus those that may not be a police response is something we're working on. I think that not only is it about a resource retention issue and making certain that those resources are husbanded properly for other kinds of incidents, it's also the fact that, driving code across the city from the south end, say, to the old north end for an overdose that may already have been addressed medically by people around the person suffering the overdose, by fire that gets on scene, is not necessarily the best use of police resources or even the safest in that case. Other things that kept it a police matter before, however, were the fact that our CSLs responded to most overdoses and were tasked with trying to make connections with the person who had been revived or treated. We also, we used to have the only mechanisms inside the police department, this would be prior to the pandemic, for doing opioid outreach to people who had experienced overdose or, for that matter, were arrested for drug-related incidents or crimes. And we would do screenings in the cells. We would connect them with our opioid coordinator. And so that was something that also spoke towards and argued for a police response. The CSLs can now respond without police being present and could respond to incidents with fire without requiring police to be there. And so that is something we're talking about.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, please. So drug tips, you'll see the number of tips that are at the bottom, and that is those are total year tips. That's the full year for each of the years but 2023, which is only year to date. And that, to be honest, I don't know that that's 9/15 as almost every other stat in the document is. I think that might have been the day it was actually run, which was September 20th. So, it could be fudged by 202, 201, 199, but I just wanted to be honest about that. Everywhere else, it was either a full year. Everywhere else in the document is usually either a full year of data or the amount up to September 15th. And then that is a graphic, that's a screen grab of the home page of the Burlington Police Department in the City of Burlington webpage. And submit a tip is in the red circle there. Next, please. We don't do street-level enforcement, and we do not arrest people who are experiencing overdose or who are clearly victims of substance use disorder themselves. We will not, and I do not ever envision returning to a point where we, for example, would make arrests for possession of drugs that are designed for treatment, irrespective of whether or not that drug has a prescription, such as buprenorphine. But I do think that we have reached a point where not having any enforcement at all at the street level is harming us. Nevertheless, this is a picture of the kind of enforcement that we still do and that we have done and have never stopped doing. This is work done by the drug unit. The drug unit is smaller than it has been, as are most parts of the police department, but we've had a number of cases that are I think, worthy of note. Each of those underlined pieces is a hyperlink, and so if you look this up online and go to the PDF, you can use those hyperlinks to go to either media reports or press releases, often from the U.S. Attorney's Office. It is with the U.S. Attorney's Office and our federal partners with whom we work most often on these topics. I think that they are very important. What they don't do, even though many of these have involved significant seizures of drugs, large quantities, we just had one that we issued a press release about on Thursday of this past week. We are still, making this work happen on a regular basis. But irrespective of the scope and scale of the seizures, I don't have any disillusion or fantasy that this is addressing the supply part of our supply and demand problem. What it does address, and it does quite a good job of that, is it addresses the quality of life issues that spring up around locations where drugs are used and sold and purchased and distributed. And those problems are myriad. Anytime you put a location that distributes and encourages the use of drugs in a neighborhood, it makes the quality of life in that neighborhood plummet. And that includes, houses on one that we just made an arrest at a location on North Champlain. There are other locations in the city where this happens. People are subject to the in and out traffic of such a location. They are subject to the attendant crime that goes to feed the substance use disorder, that car break-ins, property theft, the colloquially called porch pirates and the theft of packages and things. They are subject to people procuring and then immediately using in the vicinity of the location, in backyards or on the street. And so what these operations do effectively is disrupt that kind of activity at a specific location, and they address those quality of life issues. We're under no illusion that this is the way to address the supply problem. The supply problem is a demand problem. Next, please. There are a lot of tools that we have as a society for addressing substance use, and specifically this substance use crisis. Among them, and by no means is this comprehensive or total, but among them are decarceration, deprosecution, harm reduction, and street-level enforcement. Over the past few years, 3 of those have been turned all the way up, and 1 has been all but shut off, and this mix is not working. Next, please. A reminder of our starting pay and that we are hiring, as always. And that's it.
Questions, Commissioner Cox?
Chief, good evening. This is not so much a question as more, well, I guess there's questions involved, but I've been thinking about the Coast Guard station, Burlington, and concerns about the imminent shutdown. And the last time that we had a federal shutdown, well, the Coast Guard's always required to continue working, even when they're not getting paid.
Yeah.
They continue to save lives. They continue to assist in police responses. They continue doing all of their work, even when they're not getting paid to do so.
That was their boat in the photo of the manhunt. So on that slide that showed the officer up on a cliff, the bright light on the water below was the Coast Guard boat.
Yeah, and so during previous police department chief tenures, they really weren't interested in speaking to Coast Guard Station Burlington for reasons unknown to the Coast Guard, but they wouldn't respond to emails or phone calls. And so it was just like, okay. And so I would just ask you to consider, if there is a shutdown, that even getting in touch with them before a shutdown, and just as an act of solidarity and moral support, to have a conversation with the station. And I can talk to you directly or send you an email with the contact information, but it does seem, and then there's things that you could do together. For example, they have a grill with a great view. They have training rooms. They have they have a galley with people that actually cook meals for people. And I know that you guys have a pretty decent workout room. And so there may be things that if the two agencies kind of coalesce together a little bit and work together a little bit, that there might be some benefits to both cadres.
Sure, thank you, that's a
So-
great suggestion.
I have a question. Yes.
This is the exact document that's up on the website. We just went over it in this room.
Any other commissioners have any questions? I have a couple of questions, but I can wait if other people have questions. Commissioner Oski, Commissioner Keefe. Okay, all right. I have a couple of questions for you, Chief. One is that I'm kind of interested in this, the police vehicles slide that you posted there, and you described the cost of them, and you also said that you have only received 2 new cruisers since 2021. I know that it takes, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I shouldn't say I know, but isn't there a process by which you order these vehicles, and isn't there a time lag between when you order and when they arrive to you? I'm just trying to figure this out if, in terms of, Board of Finance or somebody to appeal to, and to say, because it seems like being down 7 vehicles seem like a lot.
Yes, I mean, I think that there was probably a thought that since we were so understaffed, the vehicles maybe didn't need to be processed. You're correct, there is a lag. There is a lag between when you purchase a vehicle, when you order it, when you purchase it, then you have to spec it out, and you have to send it for all these extra things, including a cage and the imagery on the side and the lights and the computer work that's inside and the radio and all this stuff. And that does take time. We had ordered them. We had 5 on order, I believe, and I don't have the dates right in front of me or the exact timing. But that order, for whatever reason, it didn't get completed. And so it's been, and I don't know for sure, and I'm trying to figure out with the city. We're working hard with our partners at the city. These are centrally purchased, not purchased by the police department. What happened with that order? Was it placed in abeyance? Was it canceled? Was it sort of put on short-term hold because there did appear to be a buffer with regard to headcount and the need for patrol cruisers? But certainly we're at a stage right now where we do need new ones, and we're working on addressing that.
Okay. And to me, that seems like a pretty important step for you all in terms of that you need that hardware to work, and being down 7 vehicles seems like a particularly critical moment. So anyway, we can, I guess, as a commission, can make any contribution to your voice. We are willing to
Thank you.
do so.
Thank you. I don't think that's necessary yet. We're still trying to figure out where, what happened. And certainly, I don't believe there was any decision on the city's part to say we're not going to give the police department vehicles. That is, as I've said before and cannot say often enough, the mayor has been nothing but supportive of the police department over the past several years. And so this is something we're just trying to figure out what did happen to those, and what do we need to do to fix the gap.
Some things shouldn't fall through the crack. I think that's my thoughts. Also, you gave the description of the drug tips, the where to call, and these are the on the internet where to post. But you also at the same time said that the police department is behind in catching up with the online tips.
Yes. Thanks for asking that.
I'm just curious to know how you can balance that moving forward.
Sure. So those are two different things. The online reports are for crimes or conditions or stolen property, for example, and those go through that's a very formal reporting process. It actually is. I've had numbers of people tell me that it's too laborious, and I don't doubt that it is, but it actually requires less information than the officers themselves have to take when they go in person to take an incident report. But that is a separate issue from the drug tip line. The drug tip line goes straight as an email right to the drug unit, and the drug unit does in fact look at every single one of those. They're pretty good about getting back to people who don't make their tip anonymously. But what they definitely do is they incorporate all of it into sort of intelligence about specific locations, about, what is being seen. And it should come as no surprise that, a lot of these tips sort of fall into the same basic baskets of, okay, this is about some activity that we've been seeing in the vicinity of Pomeroy Park. This is about activity that we've been seeing in the vicinity of, King Street and Champlain, or King and Pine. And so when those things happen, they take that and they add that to sort of an ongoing amount of information about cases that they're working on. And it's separate from that huge backlog that we do have on the online reporting.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just wanted to mention, I don't think that you mentioned this in your report, but there was just that very recent bust of a drug dealer that I thought that's so important, and I was just so happy to see that. So anyway, I think that seeing that sort of thing happening where they're actually having some success, even if it's just from time to time, everyone counts. So
if it's the one if the one to which you're referring is what happened on Thursday night, it literally came in. They did that as I hit send on this. So I had just finished this, hit send, and had it sent to you, and also had it sent and put up on the website, and then did a media release saying, it's available. And actually, as I was doing that, the detective who was the lead on that came into the office and said, hey, you want to see what we got in the other room, Chief? And I went in and saw what they had in the other room with regard to recovered narcotic product.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
you,
you.
Chief. I don't think there are any other questions. Then we can move on to the next agenda item, which is commission business. 5.1 is the use of force report from last month, which my note says have not been made available to the commission as of this afternoon. Turns out it has been made available to us in the new system that, I don't know if other commissioners, Commissioner Keefe, you found it, right? Whereas, Commissioner Oski, have you been able to find it? Okay, it's in the agenda packet. If you go to the civic clerk, it's right after the chief's report. Chief, I did send email twice to Shannon and who else was that? DC LeBrac, I think. AC LeBrac asking for the use of force, and I never heard back.
I'm sorry about that, but I do think they posted it. I'm trying to find it right now.
They did. So,
they even said we posted it.
so we were sitting there, and I'm writing, okay, it'd be a good idea to have it to us in a timely manner. I'm writing all this down. Apparently, it was sent to us in a timely manner. We just didn't know it was sent to us in a timely manner, so.
Well, I've just received, Shannon is saying that she didn't receive an email from you, so I don't know what happened there.
Right,
I will say this, in the past, there are ghost emails for Deputy Chief Labarge, for Shannon, and I think there's one for me as well that goes to burlingtonvt.org, or gov rather than bpdvt.org. And it doesn't go anywhere if that's the case. And so I don't know if that's it or not, but we'll certainly check and double check to see if we missed something from you, Council Chair, Commission Chair.
No.
And
yeah.
we definitely
figure it out, yes.
We definitely did post it and send it. I'm looking right now to see if it's actually up on
No, it is up.
online.
It is up, trust me. We just found it, and we we just didn't know, and I don't know, it sounds like it's not, there is some, this is a new system too.
Yeah.
Because in the past, this is not how we have done. We were sent the use of force, and now we have changed. So I think that's fine. I'm not complaining
The
because I think
system
we
that
can figure it out.
has filled in for board docs is still a learning experience for me,
Exactly.
too.
Exactly.
There are things that are challenging about it.
But what it means is that I haven't had a chance to review it, and I don't know if other commissioners have had a chance to review it, and if other commissioners have any questions. Okay, I think that probably is the best thing, is we move it to next month to go over this month's August 15th to August 31st use of force report, and then we will also next month discuss the September use of force report. Is everybody in agreement? I don't think we need a vote. I think that's kind of, okay. All right, the next agenda item is 5.2, presentation by Laurie Emerson. Laurie, do you want to step up? Executive Director of NAMI Vermont. She will speak to the commission regarding mental health and policing, racial and New American considerations as well. Welcome, Ms. Emerson.
All right, that's louder. So my name is Laurie Emerson. I'm the Executive Director at the National Alliance on Mental Illness of Vermont. And NAMI Vermont is the independent Vermont chapter of the National Alliance on Mental Illness. We're a statewide nonprofit grassroots volunteer organization. And this year marks our 40th year that we've been in existence. And we serve family members, peers, individuals with mental illness, and also professionals who work with them, as well as advocates. And our mission is to focus on support, education, and advocacy for all communities, families, and individuals affected by mental illness. And our volunteers are the heart of NAMI Vermont. They do all of our work that we have. We provide the training for them. And they go out into the community to be able to give back to others who are experiencing mental illness. And that's what our core competency is. It's our lived experience as family members and individuals with a mental health condition. And I'd like to congratulate you, Chief Murad, with your appointment as the permanent chief, so congratulations. And NAMI Vermont has had really great relationships with the Burlington Police Department through our walk, helping to sponsor our conference this year in November. And we've also done roll call training and many other things that we've done together throughout quite a few years. So we really appreciate that partnership. And looking at NAMI Vermont as a resource for the Burlington Police Department and for the commission as well. We are a trusted source of the media. Whenever things with mental illness come up in the news, they come to NAMI Vermont and ask about information. People want to know about that lived experience story as family members and individuals. And we're there to be able to share our experiences. So 1 in 5 people experience a mental illness, and 1 in 25 a serious mental illness, like schizophrenia, major depression, and bipolar disorder. And one of the things I wanted to address from a standpoint of mental illness and violence with safety, and just to educate the commission about how people with serious mental illness are not violent to other people. In fact, only 4% of violent acts in the United States are associated with serious mental illness. So research tells us that there are other factors, such as substance use and drugs, alcohol, prior convictions of violent misdemeanors, And those can be really greater predictors of violence, that it's not just mental illness. And the media does portray people with mental illness as being violent, and we want to stop the stigma around that. And actually, people with mental illness are 23 times more likely to be victims of a violent crime. So I think those are really important statistics to know in the community when police are responding to incidents. And NAMI strongly advocates that people with mental illnesses not be stigmatized and subjected to discrimination by being labeled criminal or violent. And many times we do talk to the media and try to debunk this myth that a lot of people make that connection with mental illness and violence. And a person with severe mental illness without substance abuse issues has the same chances of being violent as any other person without substance abuse issues in the general population. So one of the laws that has recently passed is with the Extreme Risk Protection Order. And the Vermont legislature is really a leader in using non-discriminatory language written within these IRPA laws. So I really commend our legislature for being able to craft laws without putting in instances that revolve around mental illness. And additionally, we ask that law enforcement officers assigned responsibility for removing firearms, also be trained in de-escalation and crisis intervention training. There's a Team 2 training that is offered, as well as a crisis intervention team program that's offered. And this is one program that I would highly recommend, and maybe Chief, you're already making strides in that as well. But it really brings together community partners, whether it be EMS, people within mental health, substance use, dispatchers, housing, and people all come together to problem solve about the different challenges in the community. And I've been part of this program in Montpelier, and this program meets once a month, but it's not really having the city involved or leading this. It's having other organizations help, and we're all working together to solve problems. And it's just a great way to bring the community in to be able to feel like they belong, that we're including them. And as we look at the New American community and the organizations that are serving them, involving them in these types of committee work groups is a great way to engage them in the process, and they feel like they're being included and they have a voice at the table. The other item I wanted to talk about too was 988, which is the new suicide prevention and crisis lifeline. This is not only for suicide prevention, but if somebody's in crisis, a family can call 988 and they can get help. And what we really look at from NAMI's perspective in building this 988 platform is someone to call. So you need someone to talk to, and sometimes that can really help de-escalate a situation. Instead of calling 911, call somebody who can help the family de-escalate the situation, provide resources, but then maybe you do need someone to respond, and that's where building mobile crisis teams in the community is helping. How do we remove law enforcement from the situation, except when you need safety, of course, being there, but involving peers in this process too. So Vermont does not have a peer certification program at this time, but the Department of Mental Health is funding that so that there will be peer providers that will be certified to be able to help out in instances at police departments, at hospitals, and be employed at a livable wage and using their lived experience stories, because sometimes that's what people need. They want somebody who's been there and that can understand what they're going through, and it can really de-escalate a situation. And I know, Chief, you are working on many of those initiatives as well, but I just wanted to reinforce that. So what happens when you respond and then somebody needs to go somewhere? What NAMI is really advocating for is, how do we remove the emergency department from people just boarding there? How can we help that? There are urgent care models that can help with this process. And establishing an urgent care model, and from my understanding, the Howard Center is working with UVM Medical Center with a significant amount of money that was supposed to be invested in inpatient psychiatric care at CVMC. It's now being diverted to help with community resources, which we really applaud them for shifting that funding to be able to help. So that's going to be something in the very near future that will be available in this Burlington area, or maybe out of town. I don't know if you know anything about that, Chief. So that's something to really look forward to. And as well as, urgent care models, how do we also support our kids? And there's a great program that is being done in Bennington, and I know a lot of other designated agencies are doing the same, where they have clinicians, United Counseling Services, the designated community mental health agency, is working with the hospital as well as the school to be able to intervene and help kids instead of having police respond, bringing them to the emergency room. And, I have heard from the Howard Center that they're at the beginning stages of doing something similar. So I'm very hopeful that we are making a lot of progress. And, some of the things that NAMI Vermont is doing, we're working with schools to be able to educate students, because we need to start with our youth. We need to educate them. We need to help them know how to help a friend, know the warning signs. And what we've learned from a lot of our interactions with the schools, these high school kids are pretty smart. They know this stuff. And, but their eyes always perk up when they hear that lived experience story from somebody who shares about when they were younger and how they experienced depression. But I also heard from school counselors, they said, we need to start even sooner than middle school. We need to start with elementary school. So one of the NAMIs had created this coloring book. It's called Meet Little Monster. And it talks about feelings and being able to identify your feelings, how to regulate them. So, we're distributing this to schools as well as doing other presentations. And as a matter of fact, we had some great partnerships with Hotel Vermont. This past January, they invited us in to do mental health training, and they invited their community partners in to be able to hear about some of these resources that are available. And we're looking to do this again next year as well. Some of the other activities that we have going on, are working in committees, work groups. But we'd love to have you share resources about our support groups. And when police are out on calls, they can hand this little business card to the families, people who are having a mental health crisis. And it's both for family members and a separate one for individuals with mental illness as well. So would love to come and do, another roll call training and share that with the officers to just provide those extra resources. How can we help the community be able to address these crises so it doesn't get to that level? And that's how NAMI Vermont can really help, is to intervene early so it doesn't get to that crisis stage. I want to thank Burlington Police Department for being a sponsor of our conference this year. It'll be in November, so we appreciate that. And another item I wanted to share with everybody, we're showing a free documentary throughout the state. We're going to have something at Main Street Landing, October 5th from 6 to 8:30. It's a free documentary about anxiety in our children called Anxious Nation. So would love to have you share this with your network, with colleagues, anybody who would like to attend. So I'd like to open it up for any questions that people might have.
Hey, Commissioner Cox?
So I was actually interested in, Chief Murad, I sort of mentioned to Ms. Emerson about the CARES program, but I thought maybe you could speak to that so that she could learn something about what we're doing here.
Sure. Thanks for that chance. So I have NAMI pamphlets on my desk in my office on the conference table for people to take or to look at when we talk. I know the CSLs routinely hand out your material and have your material in their area, in the Cape area. And so, obviously a terrific partnership. We're glad to be helping to sponsor your upcoming event. The Burlington CARES team is what you described, that kind of mobile crisis response team. It is it's in progress. We don't have it up yet. We've posted for the clinician positions. We are working hard with the hospital to arrange for nurse positions because the concept behind the team are co-deployed pairs, one clinician, one nurse practitioner who can go into the field and address issues in the field in ways that do exactly what you just said, which is relieve the burden from the emergency department and prevent people from having to go to the hospital. Obviously, sometimes that is the appropriate course of action, and that's where you would send somebody. In the same way that this is a team designed to address situations without having police presence, but there are going to be times where it needs to have police present at its calls owing to safety issues. But when we can avoid having police respond, when we can avoid having to go to the emergency department, that is the goal. A team like this makes that a much more achievable goal. So the ability to help with issues around certain kinds of in-the-field medical care, wound care, certain kinds of medicine and questions about medicine or distribution of medicine, and not distribution in the sense that everything has to be in accordance with what nurse practitioners can do, and all of it has to be underpinned from a medical perspective by the University Medical Center and doctors there. The clinicians, on the other hand, are not necessarily QMHPs, although they may be. But right now, we're also hiring for people who are rostered but not fully qualified mental health care providers who are capable of issuing, as you talked, about EEs or ERPOs, but are still able to connect people with services to do certain kinds of counseling and care in the field. And that's the idea behind the program. It's one that we've been working on for quite some time now, and we're not as far as I know the mayor wishes that we were. I know that Council President Paul has been tremendously supportive and eager to see this, supportive of this idea and eager to see it implemented, and we're not quite there yet. It is one that we've gotten a lot farther down the field than we once were, but we haven't quite crossed the goal line.
Yeah, it's so encouraging to hear that, it's in the works.
Commissioner Cox?
Thanks. I just had one other really quick question, which is that the BPD has had on their very long list of trainings and things to do to have the CIT training. But part of the problem is the downsizing of the department during the pandemic and the post-George Floyd era has made it difficult for them to engage in lengthy training. And now they're rebuilding the department. And one thing I mentioned to them that hopefully eventually they'd get to a point where they have the luxury of being able to send people off for a 40-hour training. But in the meantime, that the mental health first aid may be a rational alternative as being a much quicker training, but give people some tools to help with their responding to a case that involves people with mental health disabilities. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about the mental health first aid training.
I think that that would be an excellent complement to receive that training. I think the more people can get, the better. I don't think that, there is any limit to what we can learn and be able to help people. NAMI Vermont also has many different trainings, and just learning from the lived experience stories as well can be very educational too. Team 2 training, as well as, I know, Chief, we invited you to come to one of the meetings with the CIT steering committee. As a matter of fact, they're doing their second training again for officers this year. And it's not just for officers, they're also including EMS, so fire, dispatchers, everybody's involved with that. So, and some of the surrounding towns in Barrie as well. So it's a big commitment. 40 hours for the whole week is really difficult, but they're trying to break it up into a couple different weeks to be able to make it manageable. And, I'm sure the chief there would love to share it, as you're moving towards that point of wanting to implement something like that too.
Any other questions for Ms. Emerson from any commissioners? I actually have a question for you, I think. When I heard you speak, I was really encouraged about sort of separating the mental health aspect from policing, because I feel like they don't have to be mutually, they don't always have to be connected, right? I mean, I felt like you were speaking to that. You're speaking to that tension, but also a separation, that sometimes it's better to deal with mental illness or address mental illness outside of policing.
Right.
That would be ideal, right, in some ways. Meanwhile, I'm just curious to know, what kind of outcomes have you seen with New American communities when it comes to mental health challenges? Because I feel like that is one community that doesn't always, there's a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. And sometimes there's
Right.
just no knowledge of it. So, but at the same time, they do need the help.
Absolutely.
So if you can address that, what are the ways that you have dealt with that at all?
I've been talking to numerous organizations, and, new Americans that are coming here, they've already been traumatized. And, being involved in a trauma, that can, affect somebody's mental health. And, having all those exposures like they did, and then they come to a new country, and their culture may be very different they don't really address mental health, that it's not something you talk about. And being able to have somebody understand their culture, their language, and the ways that they do things is really needed. How do we develop our workforce so that people can connect with the different cultures, the different languages, to be able to help people? One of the things that NAMI is saying is working with those faith leaders from those cultures, so then they can help bridge that gap, make that connection. So that's one approach, because they do, many people go to their faith leaders to be able to help with counseling. And, that's just one approach that I've read about through NAMI that people are doing. But then again, it's all about belonging. It's all about, how do we create welcoming communities for everybody? And the more we do that, then people are more apt to feel supported, and, creating those welcoming communities no matter where you are, whether it be in school or, at church, within the hospitals. As a matter of fact, I've been talking to the Rotaries, and one of their initiatives is on mental health, and they said that's exactly what we're trying to do, is create a welcoming community at the Rotary, and to try and engage people more and sit and be able to ask them, how are you? No, how are you really? You just don't say, oh, I'm okay. No. So, you probably got to make a little time for somebody if they do want to go into depth about how they really are. But it's being able to listen and create that open space for people.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work you do. Thank you so much. I appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
No other questions, I assume, from any of the commissioners? Commissioner Keefe? No? Okay. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. The next agenda item is 5.3, which is the presentation of a draft copy of Burlington Police Department 2022 Annual Report by Zoe Portlis. Am I saying that name right? Okay. And you are a city data analyst. The draft copy was distributed to all commissioners and uploaded on Civic Clerk site.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen if you could enable me.
Want to make sure your microphone is on as well.
Could I be enabled for screen sharing?
There. Okay.
All right. Well, good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for having me here. So I am going to be presenting on the BPD's annual report covering the year 2022. I'm going to give you some of the key findings from the report for each of the sections of the report listed here. I'm going to speak briefly about where people can find resources on data and this report and others. And then hopefully we will have around 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end.
Yeah.
Sorry. First, I just wanted to mention a little bit of context for this. This is the third annual report for the Police Commission, and it came out of a motion that was passed by the Commission in 2021. And so previously, these sections of the report that are on the screen right now had their own individual reports in some capacity. And here they are combined, and there's a little bit more data analysis to answer some of the questions that were in that motion. So jumping into the sections of the report, in 2022, the BPD interacted with a little over 17,000 unique individuals. Most of these people interacted with the BPD once or twice. And this is just the unique individuals, not necessarily the number of incidents, which I'll cover a little bit later. And so for the people who had some type of race data recorded, there were about 14,000. 87.2% of those people were white, 8.6% were black, and 3.2% were Asian. For the other groups, it was less than 1% each. And so I have here the results from the 2020 census for people who responded that they were one of these groups alone, just for a point of reference. And so you can see that for white and black people interacting with the police, the proportion is slightly higher than their proportion of the population based on that metric. And for Asian people interacting with the police, it's slightly lower. So an incident is the unit of police activity, and so you can think of this basically as a call, but it can come from other sources like officers on patrol and other sources besides a literal phone call. So in 2022, there were 24,856 incidents, which was up 15% from 2021, and you can see on the right, the top is the total incidents. A lot of this change over the last decade or so is because of changes in things like traffic enforcement and foot patrol. And in 2022, the most common type of incidents included suspicious events, mental health issues, alarms. On the right, in the lower part of this graph, we have the priority 1 incidents over time. There were 2,697 priority 1 incidents, which was up 5% from 2021. And this is the highest for all of the years that I have data available. A lot of this is driven by changes in overdoses, which are a priority 1 incident, and they make up, in 2022, they make up over 9% of the priority 1 incidents. So offenses are essentially crimes recorded by the police department, either because they were observed by an officer or reported to the department. There were 4,524 total offenses in 2022, which was up 13% since 2021. And you can see that on the top half of the graph on the right. The bottom half shows just of those which were classified as violent offenses. There were 489 violent offenses, which was up 5% from 2021, but lower than every year before that. Here you can see the officer-initiated traffic stops, and so this is excluding traffic stops that were made because of a call, because of a report, or related to a different incident or crime. In 2022, there were 416 officer-initiated traffic stops, which is down 35% from the year before, and also, yes.
Sorry, is it okay if we interrupt in the middle to ask a question?
Go ahead.
Just on the last slide about violent offenses, I thought I read in the text that the definition of what was a violent offense changed this year. So is that increase of 5% apples to oranges, or is that considering the change in the definition?
Great question. So all of the data points on this graph, I went back and I changed how I analyzed it, and they were defined
All right,
the same way.
thank you.
Yep. And just to reiterate, the change is just that disorderly conduct is now classified with the violent offenses. So as I mentioned, the traffic stops are down 35% since last year, and this is part of a trend over the last few years because of the de-emphasis of traffic enforcement by the BPD. And so here we have the stops of different races of operators of vehicles by the BPD, and this is being compared to the crash data for Burlington, and so this is used as our proxy instead of something like the census data, because not everyone who drives in Burlington is a resident of Burlington. And so you can see the stop is in the solid lines, and then the dashed lines are the crash proportions for these groups. And so this year, 2022, we have a very similar proportion of stops and proportion of crashes for each of these groups, which is not always the case for the past few years. Here we see the arrests by severity, so total arrests in red, and in blue is the violent arrests. There were 1,037 total arrests in 2022, which is up 5% from 2021, but not higher than any year before that. Here I compare the arrests for white and black arrestees to the census data and the American Community Survey data. And so the census data is for 2020, and the other years is the American Community Survey, which is not a complete count like the census, which is why there's error bars on those points. And so I have lines for both this race alone in Burlington and this race and maybe another in red and green respectively, and then the blue squares are this race percentage of arrests, and purple crosses are this race percentage of arrests for only violent offenses. And what we see here is that white people in Burlington make up, or I should say people in Burlington are made up mostly of white people, but the proportion of arrests for both total arrests and the violent offenses are lower for white arrestees. And the opposite is true for black Burlingtonians, is lower than the proportion of arrests for both all arrests and violent arrests who were Black arrestees. Lastly, we have the uses of force. There were 208 uses of force in 2022. Yeah.
Thank you. On the data, is it differentiated between, like, say, like an out-of-town drug dealer who comes here and commits violence versus a resident of Burlington?
So in this comparison, no, I just compared all of the arrestees using the residence data. In the data, I do have, if it's available, residents for people who are arrested. So that is something that could be looked at.
Thank you.
Yeah. So returning to the use of force, as I said, 208 uses of force in 2022, which is up 11% from 2021. The majority of those were either on white or Black subjects of force. There were 150 uses of force on white subjects and 49 on Black subjects. For this comparison, instead of using census data, I used both the interactions with the police and arrests made by the BPD to the uses of force on white and Black subjects of force. On the right, the interactions, the percent of interactions with the police who are white is similar to the percent of arrestees who are white, and the percent of subjects of force who are white. This is the first time it's been a very similar percentage. On the right, we have Black uses of force, or Black subjects of force, is for the first time in several years, since 2016, similar to the percent of arrestees who are Black. And both of these are higher than the percent of people who interacted with the BPD who are Black. And so just as a brief note, here are a few sources where people can find this report, as well as both the 2020 and 2021 reports, and previous reports that is on the Burlington Police Department's website under the report section, along with those use of force reports that the chief spoke about earlier. I also want to mention the BTV Stat Data Hub for the city, which is where there is open data as well as dashboards where people can explore this anonymized data, and not just for the police department, but other sources as well. So if the commissioners have any questions, I am happy to take them.
Thank you. Do any of the commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Oski.
Thank you very much. This is a question more for the chief than for you, but maybe you both have some reflection. The racial disparities in arrests and in use of force, what do you make of that?
You know, this is a challenge that we've seen for a very long time. I think that in some ways the numbers and percentages have narrowed this year in ways that are positive. The use of force has come in line with arrests, but arrests remain higher than contacts, and they remain higher than the population as well. Contact is actually pretty much in line with population. You know, if you look at the incidents that we report with regard to use of force, I don't see troubling patterns in those uses of force. We make a lot of those visually public now, as well as written. All of them are made public in a written format. A number of them are now made public in a video format online. Anytime there is a use of force against a person of color, it's reported to the mayor within usually about 12 hours. And the patterns that would be troubling beyond the mere existence of the disparity don't present themselves. Disparity is not automatically indicative of bias. There are a host of issues that I think are intended upon that. Why is it that, you know, when we, and so one thing that this shows with regard to certain kinds of offenses or crimes, you know, the the numbers are not necessarily worse than they've been in past years in 2022, but we know very well that with regard to some of the most important categories, those being gunfire and shootings as a subcategory of gunfire, and then murder, often as a subcategory of gunfire as well, but also murders that happened that were not gunfire related, we saw the absolute worst year in our city's history for those categories. And unfortunately, the truth was that the representations of who was both victim of those crimes and perpetrator of those crimes was vastly disproportionate to the city as a whole. And that's not a matter of police bias. That is a matter of something else. And what that something else is something that bedevils us and troubles us all as a society.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Commissioner Keefe.
But to follow on that question, though, could steps be taken to continue to improve? I mean,
I'm hopeful that they can, but I also don't know that that what we see, for example, with the closure of use of force versus arrest is something that's necessarily intentional. I think these are very small numbers, and they're predicated on each individual interaction between officers and subjects. And when it comes to force, it's the subject who determines what that force is going to be. With regard to arrest, too, that too is predicated on the actions of the person, who's undertaking the offense. I think that I want officers to think about these things at all times. We engaged in a lengthy training around systemic oppression and around issues of bias, and not just racial disparity or inequality, but also sexual inequality, inequality based on immigration status, and inequality based on sexual orientation. The state requires 4 hours of us. We did 16. And these are things that we take very seriously. I want officers to think about these things, to understand these things. But when an officer is addressing a person who's trying to escape or trying to strike them, his or her reaction is going to be of that moment, and dictated by that behavior. I think that in addressing each of these in an individual kind of way and looking at all of those 208 and having them all out, it becomes a matter of saying what's happening in each of those individual instances if we don't see some sort of overarching pattern. And so I certainly want always to strive to have no use of force at all against anybody, irrespective of that person's identity. And that's what officers want too. It is infinitely better to talk someone into understanding that going along with our rightful and lawful authority is best for everybody in that moment than it is to have to put hands on somebody. But putting hands on people generally comes because the people aren't cooperating in that way.
Sorry, but I just can't let that comment go without a response.
Sure.
That you said something to the effect of when it comes to force, it's the subject that determines the extent of the force. And in a vacuum, I would agree with you, but in reality, we've seen it. We've seen it in the BPD. We've seen it in other police interactions, that the police can escalate a situation that can result in use of force. So I think it's not helpful and a bit naive to say flatly that it's the subject that is the determination of the use of force. That's it.
I agree with Commissioner Oski because I just want to point to one thing, but because my point being that there's clearly still a learning curve that's happening, and I would continue BPD to be committed to that. For example, on page 32, the number of arrests by severity for years 2012 to 2022, I was excited to see that the numbers have sort of essentially stabilized. So there is this sense, clearly whatever you are describing is having an effect. However, the nonviolent misdemeanor, maybe I'm reading this wrong, Chief, and maybe you can explain this to me, the nonviolent misdemeanor arrest for whites have come down significantly. For African Americans in our community has gone up slightly. It's not a huge number, I agree. And yet that is one area I feel like there is a lot of subjectivity, a lot of subjective interpretation, because it is nonviolent misdemeanor. And I sort of went and did a little bit of research and sort of saw the parameters of that. So in that sense, I do feel there's still some learning that can happen. I agree with you generally that we are all subjective beings. There are going to be some baggage we come with, but clearly, I feel like there's still some work to be done, though it's better than ever before. So I think in that sense, I want to commend BPD for coming that far. But anyway, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, or we can just leave it at that there's still some learning, just looking at that data.
Sure. I mean, I'd be happy to go through and actually take a look at what was entailed in all those cases. It's going to be a small enough number that we can look at it. I will say that, nonviolent misdemeanor includes drugs, and that would include some drug arrests, particularly if the amount that's recovered isn't at a felony level. And so those may entail, those are arrests that we do make. With regard to there's one piece that I found very interesting in the document, and I don't have it right in front of me or the exact figures, but I believe that officers were twice as likely to be injured in with resisting subjects of color as they were against resisting white subjects. Something to that effect, wasn't it? That's the one that I corrected a couple of times in there, as far as the phrasing went. There was a significant difference.
What, can you point, I don't remember reading about
It's
officer
on
injuries.
page 43, table 23.
Page 43. It's a long report.
I read it. I didn't see that.
I love data, so the name was memory. Did you say 43?
Yes.
Yeah, it's on page 43.
Page 43 based on the page number at the bottom.
But what is the relevance to bias? What is the point being made?
Yeah, I can't hear you either.
What is the relevance to bias, and what is the point being made?
I think that's indicative of a level of resistance and force being used against officers that's disproportionate there as well. And when we talk about the officers determining, that when you say that it's not the subject who determines the force used or the level of force used, I think that statistic is an antidote to that concern.
I mean, it could also be that it's hard to say flatly that if there is racism and there is bias and an officer is amping up a situation, they're likely to get injured for sure. And I can see that it's not, I'm not sure what the point that you're trying to make is, but I don't see it as, I still don't see this as the subject determines the use of force. I think that there's a variety of factors that come into play, especially when we're talking about bias.
I think there were a lot of ifs in that statement. There were a lot of things that had to follow in order to get to the final piece. And I think that when we look at the written documentation, when we look at the video documentation, we're not seeing those ifs.
Just a note, Commissioner Oski, yeah. No, I see, I happen to see both sides essentially because I did read a report and I can share it with both of you quite recently that the long history of racism and interaction with police, and that has nothing to perhaps has to do with BPD, that African-American communities and especially men in African-American communities, do respond to police differently. It was actually one of my colleagues who did the research, do respond to police in a different way. So not necessarily defending the practice and the outcome, but all I'm saying is that I feel like just looking at that data, it could be more complicated than simply the officer amping up the situation, though I'm not saying that that's not possible. I think we have seen historically both. So it might be a little bit more complicated, but that is a discussion to be had, I think, for future. Sorry, Commissioner Keefe.
I guess where I'm a little confused is considering systemic racism that permeates our society, the statement that there is zero bias, and it sounded like there was no bias and there's really no room for improvement, is a little concerning. And then the follow-up, if I had heard correctly, was it's more likely that a black suspect would injure an officer. And I'm just really failing to see the connection, because I don't think what you're saying is that we're not biased, but the problem is that more black suspects are injuring officers. So that's where I'm confused.
I don't believe I ever said that there's no bias in the department. I don't believe I said that at all. I said that disparity does not automatically equal bias. Similarly, I think there are always opportunities for improvement, and I don't believe I ever said that that was the case either.
Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, Commissioner Cox, go ahead.
So, just like my math degrees are in, pure math. They're not like in applied math, but I did do some data analysis in one of my jobs. And I do have to say that, the law of small numbers can really skew, like how things look. And so I'd almost sort of like the idea of Chief's notion that maybe looking at all of the cases, since there's really so few, might be a lot more illuminating than to try to draw statistical conclusions off a small number of cases. So that's just something to put out there that I would find that interesting. So.
And first, I would also like to really thank you for the report. It was just an excellent report, very rich analysis. The data sets are really impressive. The amount of time and energy and thought that's gone into it, really commendable. So thank you very much. Just one point of clarification. I know you had said that violent offenses now include disorderly conduct. So is it correct to say that that the increase is 5%, and that includes with the addition of disorderly conduct?
Yes, so what I did is I just went back and I had a key that said the offenses and whether they were violent or not, and then I analyzed the data fresh compared to last year. So the numbers will look a little different compared to last year because of that change, but this year it's consistent across the entire set of data.
But that doesn't mean that disorderly conduct was responsible for that change, because disorderly conduct was included in all the previous years as well.
Yep, that's correct.
It was, okay. And about how much was added by including that category?
I would have to double check to be sure, but I believe it was maybe about 25 to 50 tops per year. It was maybe 10% increase.
Okay. And I think this is a question for you and the chief as well. It said 10% of people account for 41% of the person interactions. Could you unpack that? I'm just trying to get a sense of the scale. It really stood out to me.
Yeah, so on the graph that you're referring to, I can just find real quick. So this is page 12, figure 1. On the x-axis, we have the percentage of persons, and so that's the individual people as they interact with the police. But then on the y-axis, it's the person incidents, and so that's a combination of the people and then the incident that they are involved in. So if you have one person who's involved in 3 incidents, then that would be 1 person, 3 person incidents. And so what this is showing us is that when 10% of people have 41% of the total interactions with the police, essentially, with those incidents, it's a small number of people that are making up nearly half, close to 50%, I guess, of the incidents, or the person incidents.
I mean, I'm just really trying to get my head around that. And from an operational standpoint, following up on the question about response to overdose, is there any lessons that can be drawn? I mean, do we have a sense of what these 10% individuals, are they, is there a certain type of crime or incident they're involved in? Are there characteristics that they share, for example, addiction or mental health issues? And how might this data impact how resources are allocated on calls in the future?
There definitely is some follow-up, I think, that could be done, and there is follow-up being done with the mayor and other departments in the city. A lot of these people might present a lot of opportunities for addressing mental health and, like you mentioned, substance use. And I think that opportunities like the CSLs, the community support liaisons, might be appropriate for maybe decreasing a little bit of the recidivism there.
What's the number of those 10%?
The number of
people.
I don't have it specifically, but I think it would be about 2,000 to 3,000 people.
Meaning those 2,000 to 3,000 constitute 40% of the 17,000 in-person incidents?
Is that right? Something like that, yes.
Commissioner Cox and then Commissioner Oski.
So I was just going to say a couple real obvious ones that I'm familiar with are mental health, spousal abuse, that's sort of a domestic violence case. Some of these times, especially like if there's drugs involved, or alcohol abuse, or that sort of thing, you may end up calling the police like a number of times right in a row, as like I have some personal experience with doing this, and it's really unfortunate, but sometimes that's the only resource available, because, for example, for mental health, first call will only come and help if the person who's in a mental health crisis asks for them to come. If other people around them are being affected, first call just won't show up. And so there's problems with like just having resources available, and the police seem to be the key. So, but hopefully now CARES will supplant a lot of that. Anyway, thank you.
Commissioner Oski.
This question might be answered in the report, and I just can't wrap my head around it, but BPD responded to 24,856 incidents. My question is around the word responded. There were 24,856 incidents. Is there some way to break that number down to know how many of those were received online and followed up later, and how many were actual, like, police in the car going out or on the foot, responding in the real time?
I have a few different ways in the data that I can look at this, and none of them are completely foolproof, but it is possible to see the officer responses as well as person responses, which isn't something that had been included in the motion, but would be a good follow-up. And so that would also include online officer. It could tell you if the online officer was the only response. It can also tell you when officers responded, so if it's within a minute or two of getting the call, or if it's a follow-up sometimes for the CSLs, it might be days later that they follow up.
Right. I think that would be interesting to look at over time, and as we look at officer resources and where they're going, and what is needed. My neighbor got her car stolen, and she made a report. She heard from the police 6 days later. I made a report this isn't a criticism, I understand that this is what's happening, but I made a report for stolen property, never got a follow-up. And it's included in the data, but when we're looking at what our resources are and what we need and how incidents are being responded to, it might be interesting to look at what the response was when it came in, as opposed to just looking, because I don't think that it's accurate to say that they responded to 24,856 incidents. There were that many incidents, but they were responded to in a variety of ways.
That's a great point, thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners have any questions? All right, okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. I agree
you.
with Commissioner Keith. I think this is a wonderful report and a lot of food for thought for, not only for the commission, but for BPD as well, I hope. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, the next agenda item is 6.1, Officer and Staff Commendations. We haven't received any. Have we, Commissioner Cox? Okay, go ahead, sorry.
So this is we haven't received any
Okay.
accommodations for this month, but I did want to just make a comment
Oh,
about
yes.
the accommodations that the commission, at least I and Commissioner Rao have been presenting. And I just wanted to say a little piece about this. So the commission has been granted the authority.
You turn on the.
I'm sorry. Thank you. So the commission has been granted the authority to review policies, practices, and procedures of the BPD through resolution of the city council. One of our core responsibilities is to be the bridge between the BPD and the community. As part of that authority and responsibility, at least some of us have worked on commendations of the BPD and its officers where appropriate to shine a community light on good police practice and procedure and to express our approval. Our focus is generally not on the exemplary conduct of one or more specific officers. Rather, our focus is on describing the scenario and then focusing on what the BPD did as an organization in responding to the scenario and why that was important and commendable. Although we've sometimes named specific officers who were instrumental in the commendable practice, we also on several occasions recognize an entire team or unit of officers without naming particular officers. We appreciate the willingness of the BPD to provide information as requested to flesh out surrounding circumstances in the BPD's response, and we're requesting that they continue to do so. And so recently I'd sent a proposed commendation to your outreach person, and it got shunted up and then pushed back. And I just was a little bit concerned and that I didn't want to say one sentence about like that they were really nice or did a really good job. I really, in fact, want, when I write them up, and I'm hoping that when other commissioners write one up, that we focus on the practice and procedure aspect, which really sometimes does require more of an explanation, so it makes it longer than just a simple sentence saying, Officer Joe is really nice and helping me, helpful when I had my car accident. It's something lengthier because we're describing the scenario and then what the BPD did to respond to the scenario. And so we just want to make sure that, that we are able to continue this. If you don't think it's useful or you think that somehow we've derailed ourselves by doing this or doing something that's like adverse to the BPD's interest, then I'd be happy to have a discussion around that. But otherwise, I think that it's useful for us to let the community know what we're seeing in terms of BPD's response as an organization.
Sure.
on that level. Thank you.
Thank you. Executive Manager Trammell says that she did send over 4 commendations. I don't know if those just sort of got misplaced, and that happens.
We are not getting much.
With regard to, longer commendations, we certainly welcome any recognition of good performance in the same way that we welcome critiques that lead to improvement or that point out, if God forbid, there's actual malfeasance. We certainly welcome commendations. I think that one of the things I like about the commendations is they're generally incidents that don't make other kinds of news. There are certain things that we do where we put out press releases about good officer work or about an arrest or about something, and I think that that's one way of getting information to the public, and I think that sort of revisiting those kinds of things isn't necessarily always the best use of time, but for things that come in, independently or that are smaller incidents, or the everyday good work that officers do that doesn't get a press release or doesn't get acknowledged in a media coverage, for example. I do think that that's sort of what this particular part of the Police Commission agenda was always meant to do. But anyway, we'll...
So perhaps, I'm sorry for interrupting you, perhaps it should be under a different section then, because I consider, so for example, if you do a press release and you describe the situation and what happened in the press release, and newspaper reporting tends to be very fact-based, right? The W's, right? And so, but what we're interested in frequently is, so for example, in the cold case that was solved earlier this year, one of the things that was done is to have team meetings with the detectives, with department detectives and the experts. And I thought this was really useful because that educates the detectives. It makes them better detectives. Then later in the year, then they quickly ran out and solved this other, homicide case and resulting in an arrest. And certainly genetic genealogy wasn't involved in that case, but you do think that sometimes, in the second case, but you do think that in some way, that by being exposed to more sophisticated things, that it gets them thinking and sometimes more motivated and more highly educated on these things, and that's important. And so, yes, of course, you don't want to just say the 5 W's that were exactly what was in the newspaper, but I also think that the newspaper didn't really say why that thing was important. And I think it was important that they did that. I loved seeing that because I'm thinking that makes the team of detectives at BPD better, having been able to be involved in that discussion.
I think the question that I had, and this is a question for the commission as a whole, because we have been reading commendations from regular citizens, which is somewhat different from the way I see commendations come from the commission. So our job is, or at least in our job in writing those commendations, to me, would require fleshing out more, how do I say, and I agree with you to a certain extent that it's not just, we're not just interested in interpersonally, though it's wonderful that they're nice and they smiled at, shook hands. To me, it seems like were the particular commendations to officers who really did a good job of integrating their training and understood the directives and did exemplary work. I think that would be my view of commission commendation, but perhaps that requires a further discussion as well among commissioners, whether we want to take on that or not. I think that's, I don't know if other commissioners want to chime in on that or have any thoughts. No, not at this moment. Okay.
No, I agree with you.
Okay, all right. All right, we can.
So maybe, so maybe if I could just add, so maybe if you'd like, we could have a separate discussion about if it's, I'm trying to make observations about organizational level policies and practice. And that is longer than what a traditional accommodation from the public has been like. And so maybe it should be a different section in the agenda, maybe it should be some other format, maybe you don't want us to comment at all. Just please go away and don't even
No,
notice what we're doing.
it has nothing to do with what I want. This is a commission decision. It had nothing to do with what I would want. I certainly do.
We're dependent on the BPD to flesh out some of that information, because otherwise, all I have is what's in the newspaper.
Sure.
Or whatever, it's like, and so that's why, getting some of that insight when I can,
Yeah.
from like your
Getting-
outreach person or whatever, makes sense.
Yeah.
More cooperation, I guess that's what you're asking for? Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry if you felt that you didn't get enough. I'll definitely, this is something that you can work with the PIO to get. Certainly, anytime there's produced information, written information in a report, for example, that is that's in a state that can be shared, we want to share it and not make you wait for some sort of period or anything of what we would require under, for example, freedom of information requests. But I do think there's also a balance between producing new kind of information as opposed to finding information that's there. So, for example, if a narrative is available in a report that answers some questions, that's there, it's ready to go, and if it's shareable, that's something I think we would want to do. But if it would require additional, conversation with an officer in order to get further details, I don't know that that's necessarily the best use of an officer's time, given where we are. One of the frustrating things I find about certain, we deal with every single citizen complaint, for example, but, oftentimes there are complaints that are addressable almost on their face, and needing to go and get additional information, that sometimes drains the officers from doing what they otherwise would be doing and answering, things that are important in that moment, as opposed, every complaint is of course important as well, but creating new data, that's why it's an exemption from the Freedom of Information law. If information doesn't exist, you're not required to create it for a public records request. You're only required to provide what already exists. And I certainly don't want to have a posture with the agency and the commission that says only what anybody else would get through a FOIA request is what you. No, that's not the nature of a strong relationship that's mutually accommodating. But I do think there's a difference between providing information that's already been created and is there in a report versus now the PIO has to go to those officers and say, can you give me more details about what you were actually doing in that scenario, et cetera. I know I already spoke to you about, I talked to you already about this for the press release. You put it in the paper, but I need more because I need to fill in this part or that part. That may not always be the best use of their time.
I don't think I'm asking for the officer's time.
Okay, if I misunderstood, then forgive me.
I think it was a very good point to clarify, because I was also getting a little confused. And I think, as you said with complaints, I think our observation has been they've been very thoroughly investigated and been forthcoming with the information to the commission. So I do feel if we are looking at policies and procedures that are effective, I think on the face the information we have is really sufficient. Yeah. And as you said, that kind of looking for another angle, I think that is kind of stretches beyond, I think, as you said, the best use of officers' time. And frankly, I think what maybe our role is in terms of, looking at more of that institutional policies and procedures. So thank you for clarifying.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I must have missed something in my exposition, but when I've asked for information, it may have just been like, were there any persons like on this that like were on this team that I didn't have down on my list? And I think that's the only kinds of information that I've asked for.
Yeah, and that should be easily enough. That should be easy enough to provide. So if it wasn't, I'm sorry for that.
And hopefully we'll get all the emails that have been sent to us. For some reason, I'm not getting any of those emails. So I will reach out to Shannon, even if I have to call her to sort of make sure that the emails are coming to us. Okay, thank you. The next agenda item is 7.1, which is Commissioner Update. And I have a few updates to read. Following a special commission meeting on September 12th and with full agreement of all commissioners, Commissioner Cox and I sent a letter to Burlington Police Union requesting they reconsider their decision and release all use of force body-worn camera footage to the commission in the spirit of collaboration, transparency, and full accountability, and in compliance with what the City Council and the Mayor had authorized. We still await the union's response. The letter describing the commission's position on release of body-worn camera footage is publicly available for those people watching on Civic Clerk's site. A subcommittee comprised of Commissioner Oski and Commission Attorney Anthony Arapino is revising the body-worn camera footage release policy of the commission. I don't know, Commissioner Oski, if you have any update on that or
No update yet. Hopefully, we'll have something for you before the next commission meeting.
Thank you. Similarly, a subcommittee comprised of Commissioner Cox, Commissioner Keefe, and Commissioner Attorney Anthony Irapino will work to revise the policy document titled Role of the Burlington Police Commission in Reviewing Complaints Against BPD Employees. Again, does that subcommittee have any report, or it's too early for you all to, Commissioner Cox, Commissioner Keefe, haven't met, working? Okay, all right, okay.
May I?
Yes, go ahead.
So I didn't realize that you had a subcommittee working on that. I'd merely like to point out that the creation of that was a joint effort by then interim Chief Morrison and then Commissioner Hart. If you're reviewing it for the sake of sort of coming back for additional work, I mean, at some point, that has to incorporate the police department. That
Yes.
has to be a joint effort and a joint decision as well to make any emendations to that.
Commissioner Oski and Commissioner Cox, I think that is being planned. I don't think any of the revisions would happen without including BPD.
Also,
Yeah, go ahead.
according to City Attorney Haley McClanahan, we don't actually have any authority to make policy. According to Commission Council, there's an applied authority to create policy to effectuate those few things that we've actually been granted power to do. So it seems that under this implied authority, that we may have authority to do one or both of the things. But in both cases, our goal is to do this in a collaborative fashion. And certainly, you know, there's, do you remember the list of questions that we had in I believe in the July meeting, where we had like stuff that Commissioner Seguino had in her letter to the Joint Committee, and then questions around like, here's our authority. Try to find the authority for each different thing, what we actually had authority for, and then what changes that I could see needed to be made. And a lot of them were related to the complaint policy. But if you'll recall, in virtually every one, as I had written them out, your input was like really the first thing that we wanted to think about is, so what did you want and what did you think made sense and how do you look at this issue? And so definitely that's what we're planning going forward.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
I think so. The Joint Ordinance and Charter Change Committee on Police Oversight has asked the commissioners to individually review two proposals, one by Councilor Bergman and the other by Councilors Hightower and Carpenter. Please send me and Commissioner Cox your comments. This is for the rest of the commissioners, and we will collate them and send them onwards for the Joint Committee's perusal. You have received that document from me, have you not? Yes, okay. All right, the next agenda item is 8.1, which is a motion to adjourn.
I move to
Oh, sorry,
adjourn.
before, are there any other, I'm sorry, I should have given you each a chance for a commissioner update. I'm sorry. Commissioner Cox, did you have your hand up, or you were going to say something else? I was going to adjourn, but any other updates from any commissioners? Already did that in September 12th meeting. Okay. Yes. Okay, so any seconds?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Cost. Any discussion? Hearing none, please say aye to agree to adjourn, not adopt the agenda. Thank you.